Richard Trenton Chase lived his life under a series of delusions that had fatal consequences. The most bizarre being his belief that he was a walking corpse whose heart was shrinking, and the only way to stop it was to consume the blood of the living and cannibalize their body parts. This is the story of the vampire killer.
Richard Chase now is doing things with small animals and birds, you know, killing them, drinking their blood.
He needed extensive care. He was not receiving as much care as he should have gotten.
Oh my God. Richard Chase was born May 23rd, 1950. He was a Gemini. He was born in Sacramento, California. Richard was raised in a very strict household and was beaten regularly by his father, which I watched an interview that said that was kind of typical in that era for children to be more harshly punished physically than what would be considered normal. But in that time, it was the norm. So I don't know. If you was a 50s baby, just let me know if that's what it is. Now, it said that Richard showed a lot of signs of mental illness or being disturbed very early on in his childhood, but his parents kind of ignored it. Like, they didn't do anything to get him help. He was described as a very unhappy and disturbed little boy, which is said to have grown worse as he got older. Now, by the age of 10, he was displaying all three signs of the McDonald triad, which, if you're unfamiliar, it's like the three telling signs that your child is going to grow up and be a serial killer. It is the torturing of animals, arson, and bedwetting, which don't necessarily guarantee that your child gonna be a serial killer, but it's like if they're doing all three, said to be like signs that your child just might grow up to be a sociopath. Now, I don't make the news, I just report it, okay? These are not my words, I'm just telling you what it is. Now, in high school, Richard managed to secure a couple of relationships, but they never really lasted long because he was kind of a strange individual. Richard was also unable to achieve and maintain an erection, and so that didn't help his cause either. Homeboy had the inability to become aroused in the presence of females, and that just didn't work out well for him. It was actually determined later on that Richard had an aversion to like conventional sexual acts, and that he could only become aroused if violent and disturbed acts were in play. Harming animals or necrophilia, like that kind of thing, turned him on, but like just regular, oh, you feel on me, I become aroused, I feel on you, you become aroused sex, that wasn't his thing. Things just kept getting worse for Richard as he got older. Eventually, his father kicked him out of the house completely because he was just doing too much. But honey, he had only just begun. Without supervision, he began to use drugs and alcohol, which led to him using it excessively, which developed into a substance abuse problem. Now, Richard, he rented an apartment with a couple of roommates. Now, unfortunately, Richard, not only was he into LSD and marijuana and alcohol, he also enjoyed walking around the house butt-ass naked in the presence of company, in the presence of his roommates. They all be in the living room watching Friends, and then he'd just come through, him and his little friend, and they were just like, you know, could you please not come through butt-ass naked and high as giraffe ass? But he was not listening. He wanted to do his own thing. I guess he felt like because he paid rent, he could do as he pleased. After a few months of this, the roommates they were at their wits' end. They were tired of the things, and they decided they were going to ask him to leave. He refused to move out. And when he refused to move out, they just decided, you know what? We're going to take this show on the road. Like, they all moved out and left him in the apartment all alone by himself. Now, all alone in his apartment, Richard begins to capture and torture small animals. He would disembowel them and then devour their intestines raw. Richard developed hypochondria. He became paranoid that he was dying, that his heart would occasionally completely stop beating, and that someone has stolen his pulmonary artery. How does one steal your artery, mister? Like, how does one get away with such a thing? And if that wasn't weird enough, he also began to complain that his cranial bones were separating on his skull, and that he could feel his bones, pieces of his cranial bones moving around and separating. And he actually shaved his head so that he could monitor this activity. Richard also was in fear or constant worried that his heart was shrinking and that the only way that he could stop this or reverse it is to consume the blood of the living. He would capture animals, removing their organs, and then he would place them in a blender and make smoothies. And he believed that these smoothies was preventing his heart from shrinking so small that it would disappear and then he would die. Now, eventually he becomes convinced completely that his heart has stopped and he is now a walking corpse. And it's like, you're making the smoothies because you don't want your heart to shrink. And then that'll kill you. But if you're a walking corpse, then technically you already dead. So I'm not really understanding. At the age of 25, Richard was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, and he was institutionalized to avoid or prevent him from hurting himself or anybody else at this point. In 1996, 1 year after this, he was hospitalized for blood poisoning after he captured a little innocent rabbit and injected himself with the blood of the rabbit. By this time, many of the patients in the institution he was in the hospital wing, they were terrified of him. They referred to him as Dracula. They were frightened by him at all times. They were afraid to be near him, to go help him. Like, he was just, I mean, imagine if you're a nurse and somebody, you have to care for somebody who is drinking the blood of animals. Like, sir, what is wrong with you? And it wasn't just this instance that made them afraid of him. He was frequently found in his little room with blood smeared on his face, which he would claim came from him shaving. But he was actually biting the heads off of birds and sucking their blood out through their little necks. You know, the part of the neck that was still connected to the body, not the head, because that wouldn't have been that much blood. But I'm sure you probably already knew that that's what I meant. But anyway, they get Richard on medication, and he does all right for a while. He's making progress. He's showing improvements. He's looking a little more normal and a little less like Dracula, Psycho Drac. And after some time went by where he wasn't still up to his old tricks, the hospital decided that he had shown enough improvement to be released to live with his parents. Now, by this time, his parents had actually separated, and so he went home to his mother's house and he was living with her. The hospital sent him home with prescriptions and instructions for his mother, along with his diagnosis and like some tips on how to treat or care for him. But unfortunately, she felt like her son didn't need all of that. She was completely against the antipsychotic that they sent him home with, and so she weaned him off of it, pretty much let him roam free to do his thing. Now, though Richard was released to his parents' care or his mother's care, there was nothing stating that he had to stay there. There was nothing legally binding him to his mother's residence. And so he didn't stay there long. He actually left because he started to accuse her of poisoning him, which he probably was feeling different because she took him off his medicine. But he felt like, and he believed wholeheartedly that his mother was poisoning him. So he left her home, moved back out on his own, and she allowed him to. Now, a couple months later, in August of 1977, Nevada police, they roll up on this truck that's like just pulled over. And in the back of the pickup truck, there is a bucket with a liver inside. And so this, of course, worries police that maybe a homicide is taking place. They're like, you know, WTF. And then they spot Richard, who was butt naked across the field, completely covered in blood. They immediately go after him and apprehend him. And he claims that the blood is his own blood and that it had seeped out onto his skin through his pores. Police actually found that the blood belonged to a cow. And so after they found that it was the cow's blood and liver and not human, they were just like, you're free to go. Nothing ever came of this incident, like, whatsoever. It was just the documentation, and that was it. Whose cow was this? The legitimacy of me wanting to know is real. We'll never know because the police released him to go back to his normal life as if nothing had ever happened. And so that's what he did. But unbeknownst to them, his normal life included the capturing, torturing, and devouring small to medium animals raw. There was one instance shortly after this where he actually ate a neighbor's cat. He then, in a very nonchalant manner, told the neighbor what he had done. Again, nothing was done about it. During this time, he had also developed a fascination with firearms. He had purchased several handguns. He would practice with them obsessively, like all day, every day, handling, cleaning, loading his little handguns, honey, and that was his new thing. Now we're still in 1977, and one random little evening, Richard decides he's going to go pay his mother a visit. Now, when she opens the door, he hurls a dead cat at her. It lands at her feet, and she's just looking at him and this cat. He immediately knelt down, ripped open this cat with his bare hands, which he either had some sharp nails or he had already put a few starter slices in his cat's belly. But whatever the case, he ripped it open seemingly with his bare hands, and then he began devouring the intestines of the cat, smearing the blood all over his face and screaming. And his mother, still standing there staring at him like the damn fool that he is, homegirl just calmly closes the door and leaves him in the hallway of her apartment building. Him and the cat. Child. She did not report the incident to the authorities because she did not want her son institutionalized again, and so she just act like it never happened. Now, on December 27th, 1977, this is the same year, a couple months after the cat incident, Richard is at home and he becomes frustrated, and so he takes a .22 caliber handgun and he fires a shot into the home of a Sacramento woman. Now, fortunately, nobody was harmed in this incident, right? Nobody. The police came out, they searched her home, they retrieved the bullet from the woman's home. Like I said, no one is harmed, but unfortunately, no one is arrested either. Like, nothing is done. 2 days after this, on December 29th, Richard is sitting at home, he's frustrated, and he's alone, he's lonely. And he had been frustrated pretty much since Christmas because his mother had refused him to come home to her house for the holidays. She just wasn't with any of the things on Christmas Day or Christmas Eve, and so she was like, you know what? No. Now, Richard was pretty much upset about this. That's what led him to shooting into the woman's house and the next couple of things that I'm about to tell you that he did. So like I said, it is now December 29th, 1971, and Richard decides he's going to get in his little car and take a drive. He takes his .22 caliber pistol with him, gets into his car, and begins driving through neighborhoods. Ambrose Griffin was a 51-year-old man. He was at the time helping his wife carry in groceries from the car when Richard came down their street. Richard spots Ambrose coming back from the car. He takes his .22 caliber pistol and he shoots Ambrose once in the chest. Now, police were able to put two and two together that the same pistol that was used in the woman's Sacramento home just 2 days prior was the same gun used to kill Ambrose Griffin. A couple of days later, it's now January 1978. It's a new year, but it's the same old raggedy ass Richard, okay? Because he is out looking for trouble. He attempts to walk into the home of a young lady that he had spotted in the neighborhood, but fortunately her doors were locked. And Richard later told detectives that a locked door signaled to him that he was not welcome, but an unlocked door gave him the message that he was indeed welcome. And so he didn't use any extra force to try to get in. He just walked around our house through the back door that was locked too. So he took off across her backyard to try someone else's home. And now Richard, he runs into a lady by the name of Nancy Holden. He recognizes her from high school. And so he asked her for a ride, but she was looking at him like, no sir. She said that she was frightened by his appearance, so she refused. He didn't push her. He just kept on going to the next house. And so further down the street, he breaks into a house of a young married couple. He steals some of their valuables. He also urinates into the drawer of their infant son's clothing, just trifling. And then he defecates on their son's bed. And in the midst of this act, the couple return home. The husband whoops his ass, but he manages, unfortunately, to get away. And that was that. Can you imagine coming home with your husband or with your wife and there is some, because right now we already know he was looking raggedy, okay, because homegirl had refused him the ride. So imagine coming home and some raggedy mother is taking a dump on your child's bed. Like, he really, if anybody ever deserved an ass whooping, it was Richard on that day. If my husband wouldn't have whooped your ass, I don't want him. Back to the story. Richard sets back off on foot into the neighborhood. Apparently, the ass whooping he had endured at the hands of homegirl's husband wasn't even enough, because he continued to try houses like for unlocked doors until he comes across the house of David and Teresa Wallen. Now, during this time, David is at work, and 3-month pregnant Teresa is at home by herself, and she had actually went out the door to take out the trash, which was why her door was unlocked. See, I feel like he was cheating, because you saw her taking out the trash. Like, of course her door's gonna be unlocked, you a-hole. But anyway, let me just finish telling the story. Sorry, get a little upset sometimes. Now, while her back is turned to her home, Richard sneaks in through the front door, and then he surprises her upon her return. And he shoots her a total of 3 times. Once in the hand, which was a defensive one because she had put her hands up, and then twice more in the head. Richard then drags her body to the bedroom, and he has sex with her body while he's simultaneously stabbing her in the back with a butcher knife. When he finishes, he turns her over, and then he cuts open her stomach and removes her vital organs. He drains all of the blood that he could manage to drain from her body into a yogurt container, which he used for a cup to drink some of it. The rest he took to the bathroom to bathe in. Now, I'm going to apologize because it's about to get a little bit more graphic and nasty in details. When he finishes bathing in the remainder of her blood, he goes into the yard, finds a pile of dog feces, returns to the home, and stuffs it down her mouth and throat. Now, because Richard has really been on a spree for a week now, and he's using the same weapon, and the crimes are being tied together, but seemingly not being tied to him, you know, he's feeling himself. He's starting to up his momentum and feel like he can do this stuff and get away with it, and he won't be caught. On January 23rd, 1978, just 2 days after what he had done to Teresa, Richard purchases 2 puppies from his neighbor. First of all, as a neighbor, I think you should know that Richard ain't somebody you should be selling puppies to. But apparently, I guess this neighbor didn't know any better, and so he sold Richard 2 puppies. Richard took the puppies home, disemboweled them, drank their blood, and took the bodies back to that neighbor's house and left them on the doorstep. Now, just 4 days after this, and only 6 days after Teresa, Richard finds 38-year-old Evelyn Meredith's doors unlocked, and so he proceeds to go inside because, like he stated, he felt like an unlocked door is an invitation. Lock your doors, people. Now, inside of the home were her 6-year-old son, Jason, herself, her 22-month-old nephew, David, and then a friend of hers by the name of Dan Meredith. Evelyn, she was in the tub in the back of the house while Dan watched the children. Dan hears Richard enter the home, and so he begins to come down the hallway where he runs into Richard, and Richard shoots him execution style, point blank range. He dies instantly, unfortunately. Richard immediately turns Dan over and steals his wallet and his keys from his pocket. 6-year-old Jason, he runs frightened to his mother's bedroom where Richard fatally shoots him twice in the head at point blank range. And on the way to killing Jason, Richard had encountered 22-month-old David and had also shot him execution style. I warned you guys that this one was going to be heavy. Richard then enters the bathroom where Evelyn still is, shoots her once execution style. He then removes her body from the tub, places her onto the bed face down, begins to sodomize her, and while he's doing this, he's sucking blood from a few slices that he had made to the back of her neck. When Richard finishes his disgusting sex act, he then stabs her an additional 6 times in the anus. He had learned somewhere that by making punctures to certain points of the body causes blood to drain and pool into the abdomen of a human's body, and so that is what he did to Evelyn. And so after this, he slices open her abdomen and drains her blood into a bucket. He then consumes all of the blood. That just makes my stomach hurt. Like, why would you be drinking blood, sir? Why? So much for me having a glass of red wine tonight, because honey, I cannot. Richard then goes to retrieve David, which is the 22-month-old nephew, He brings him into the bathtub, splits open his skull, and then begins to eat his brain matter. Now, meanwhile, a 6-year-old girl with whom Jason, Evelyn's 6-year-old son, he would often play with this young lady or this young girl. She comes, knocks on the door looking for her friend, and startles Richard. He then flees the house with baby David's body, hops into Dan's car, and leaves. Now, unfortunately, this 6-year-old girl witnesses this, and she sees the state of David's body, and of course, it's like, hell, I can't even begin to put into words or imagine what it did to her. And she goes to alert the neighbors and let them know what she had seen. The neighbor immediately goes over to Evelyn's house, breaks in, sees the bodies, and then calls the police. Now, police get there quickly, and they find that luckily Richard had left like perfect handprints, perfect footprints in the blood that he left behind. And of course, there was also that same little gun he likes to tote around, so they were able to pinpoint and connect the gun used to the previous crimes that had been taking place in the neighborhood. So they knew that whoever this person was their guide for all of the things that have been going on. Now, Richard, meanwhile, has taken David's body back to his own home. He has severed his penis and used it as a straw to suck blood from the young boy's body. He also removed his organs. He ate them raw. He made himself a smoothie drink to eat them with, and tosses what is left of the young boy's body behind a church in the neighborhood. Now, Raggedy Richard, he may have been all kinds of nasty, trifling, and disgusting, but he wasn't that smart, okay? Because he left, like I said, all kind of fingerprints, footprints, toe prints, ass prints, all over the crime scene. And so it did not take police long to identify him as the suspect. When the police arrive at Richard's house, well, his apartment, he has blood-stained utensils all over the place. His kitchen is completely blood-stained. Inside his refrigerator, there are body parts, honey, including human brains. And so Richard is apprehended, child. I don't even know what he said. Like, what did you even say? Like, how do you even try to defend that? What do you say? What does one say? What can one say? Richard was arrested, okay? They got him. They took that ass right down to the jailhouse. The media, of course, they sensationalized the trial of the vampire of Sacramento. His trial began on January 2nd, 1979, and it only lasted 5 months. In the midst of the trial, a couple of months after his last massacre, young David's body is found behind the church. And of course, this sparks a lot of outrage. And so people were really mad, and rightfully so. Prosecutors opted for the death penalty, but the defense attorneys, they rejected it, citing that Richard was mentally ill and therefore not guilty by reason of insanity. In the end, after only 5 hours of deliberating, the jury took the side of the prosecution and they returned a guilty verdict. Richard Chase, the vampire killer of Sacramento, was found guilty of 6 counts of murder and sentenced to death by gas chamber. Now, his fellow inmates were very much aware of his crime because this got so much media attention, and they were terrified of him. They were frightened by him. They often encouraged him to kill himself. I don't know, I think that's funny. I'm sorry. They're just like, yeah, go ahead, kill yourself. Under any other circumstances, that would not be funny to encourage anyone to end their life. But under this circumstance, it's funny. And Richard Chase did just that, stockpiling the anti-anxiety and antipsychotic medication that he was given by the jail until he had enough for a fatal dose. Homeboy took the fatal dose, and he was found dead in his cell the day after Christmas in 1980. The story of Richard Chase was recommended to me by Joanna Hillenburg, so shout out to you, mama. Thank you so much for supporting my channel and for recommending such a bizarre and crazy and mad psychotic, yeah, kind of interesting story. So yeah, as for the rest of you, thank you so much for watching, tuning in. I love you guys so much. I hope that you're safe. I hope that you're healthy. It's a lot going on, honey. We got so much going on, and I just hope in the midst of it you are taking care of yourself and you are happy, healthy, and emotionally, mentally, physically feeling great, or at least good, because right now good is good enough. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.